Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for coming out on a Saturday to talk about diversity and tech inclusion in the media. We have on our panel today, we have Morgan DeBaun, who's the CEO and founder of Blavity, a startup that creates and distributes content for millennials who are not represented in mainstream media, despite their $28 billion buying power. Then we have Carolina Echeverria, who is Univision's Bay Area community empowerment trailblazer. Univision Bay Area is the leading Spanish language television and radio stations, and Carolina is currently spearheading Univision's Technology Empowerment Center, UTEC, to create social impact through increasing diversity in STEM. Then we have Selena Larson, journalist for the Daily Dot in San Francisco, covering consumer technology, tech culture, and social justice. Then we have Will Schmidt, senior writer with TechCo, based out of America's finest city, San Diego, he says. He covers all territory west of the Mississippi River, digging deep for awesome local entrepreneurs, companies, and ideas. So we're going to get started here. If each of you could introduce yourselves and give us a little insight onto why you chose to spend your Saturday talking about tech inclusion.
I'll start off. Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Morgan. I'm the founder of Blavity. We make content for Black millennials. We're started about a year ago, and we have a ton of active users all over the country and the world. This is a cool panel for me to be on because it's a little bit of both things, right? Blavity is run by all Black people. We are a tech company. We have engineers and all that fun techie stuff. But we also have a lot of diversity on our team, right? From a perspective of we write about Black entrepreneurs and we write about Black issues. So I'm excited to be here.
Hi, I'm Selena. I'm a tech reporter from the Daily Dot based here in San Francisco. And in my very short intro that I sent over, I mentioned that I cover tech culture. And I think that a lot of times tech media, especially here in the Valley, tends to get really wrapped up in the software, the hardware, the things that people are making and not the people behind those things and the different issues that they're facing and their stories. So that's basically why I wanted to come out and chat with all of you and meet these other amazing panelists.
Hey guys, happy Saturday. Thanks for coming out, I really appreciate it. As Kriz said, my name is Will. I write for tech.co. They are based out of downtown Vegas. I do live in San Diego, and it is better than San Francisco. Don't kill me. Anyway, I'm here today because diversity is something that's very important to me, something I hold very close to my heart. I have the great benefit to be in a position where I get to tell people's stories for a living. And it's really interesting that not everybody has the same access to tell their own story. So I almost feel like an obligation from my perspective to help everybody, no matter what they look like, where they're from, how much money they make. I mean, you name it. I feel an obligation to help them share their passion and their story and their unique journey with the rest of the world. So that's why I'm here today.
And hello, my name is Carolina. And as mentioned, I work for Univision. And we decided that we want to be at the table. We want to bring Latinos to the table, to tech table. And we know that we can provide access. We don't know what we don't know. We're new too. And as our community, we know that we need to learn, we need to talk, we need to feel uncomfortable, we need to show up, we need to dance and not do the dance correctly in order to guide our community and say we can communicate with each other. So as Will said, we want to make sure that our community has the access to technology. And we're developing this center in San Jose, so we're here also to share, but to learn from all of you into what is needed, what has been done, what are the best practices, how can we collaborate, how can we partner with all of you to make sure that Latinos are there and are actually successful.
Thanks. So one of the things that we as we were touching base and meeting each other backstage, one of the things we talked about was not only the user-generated content that you get and the contributors that you bring, how can you work to make sure that those stories are actually coming from the voices of underrepresented groups?
Sure. Do you want us to go down the line?
Yep, just go down the line, Morgan.
Okay, sure. So at Blavity, we use Twitter for the most part to source a lot of our content and to talk to people, right? So you'll find on our Twitter feed, which you guys should all follow us right now, shameless plug. But you'll find that we'll ask questions, right? We'll say, you know, what are the issues that you care about? Late night, we'll ask funny questions about, you know, what music do you like? But when it comes to issues, a lot of people actually send us things that they want covered. Stories that are local in their communities that they know that the mainstream media won't share, or things that maybe are happening, right? Like things in Baltimore or St. Louis where our perspective isn't shared, but the story is, right? So I think creating an environment where you can invite others to pitch you, where they feel comfortable, that's the biggest thing for me and our company.
For us, I use Twitter pretty regularly as well. And then there are also different like Facebook and Reddit and different other online communities that I might not necessarily be as familiar with. So I ask my colleagues, or I'll ask people on Twitter, like, hey, are you familiar with perhaps an LGBT community or a person from an underrepresented group that would be able to write for me or potentially be a source? I think it's really important, especially as in the media, to make sure that you're representing all voices and to acknowledge when you're not, and to acknowledge where you can find these other voices. And it's okay that you don't know everything, and it's okay to admit that. So I think that obviously these very public platforms like Twitter are hugely powerful. And I think, too, as reporters, we shouldn't just be following other people in media or even like community managers or other people in technology. Really try branching out of those people that you know and spend all your time with, and find these underrepresented groups in different communities that you're not familiar with and start following them.
Yeah, definitely. Piggybacking off that a little bit, it can be really difficult to find the people who aren't at that macro level of the tech world sometimes. I mean, everybody knows who, if I asked for who are some of the hottest female entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, everybody, I could say, I'd probably get the 5 same answers from about everybody. But I think as a journalist, you have an obligation to dig deeper. You have to go deep. You have to find the people, like I said earlier, who don't have the access to tell their story. So, for example, with tech.co, we have events all over the country. We're half events, half media, and we do pitch competitions in cities like Boston, DC, New York, you name it. But when you're at those competitions, you obviously give entrepreneurs a stage to pitch their idea to a whole room of people, but at the same time, you're bringing those people in the community who are the backbone of a local tech ecosystem. You're bringing them out of the woodwork, and you're putting them in the spotlight. So that's a great way of how we source a lot of our content at tech.co. And you just by default, when you open up a competition like that, you're going to get people from all walks of life who apply, all tech entrepreneurs. And we do have a great diversity of people. And social media is obviously another huge thing, but there's also a great website called Help a Reporter. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of it. Yeah, I use that all the time. And it's the most lucrative gold mine for content from diverse sources you could ever hope for. For example, I did an article about the top 50 women who are dominating Silicon Valley. And I didn't want to highlight the macro level. I wanted to dig deep and find those 50 women who were kicking butt, but maybe people didn't know who they were. And Help a Reporter was one of the single best tools that helped me connect with people in a community where I didn't live to hear those diverse stories. It was amazing.
And I guess I'm the traditional media, so I'm television, radio for Latinos, and our business model is based on connecting with the community. We as media is really interesting. Throughout the day, people call us. If they have a kid that is sick, if they have an immigration issue, if they have a housing issue, if they have a health issue, they actually called our assignment desk and they asked for our help. So our business model is we're a resource for our community. And so our content is really based on those calls. We also hold a lot of what we call the phone banks. So we gather experts, and it could be technology experts or whatever issue we're actually asking, and we open the lines and we tell people, call us with your questions. And so that's what really guides us into the content that we should have. And why we're getting into technology, because the community is asking us, we don't know how to navigate that world. We don't know what's out there. We don't understand it. We're afraid of it. We don't feel that when we get to the table, we understand. And so we decide, okay, we're not the experts, but we have the mic. let's actually connect both worlds. So we're not going to be the ones talking. We are the ones just connecting and giving access to our community to what you guys have to offer.
So one of the other topics that we decided we were going to touch on was privilege. So privilege in the media, there are lots of different stories that even if the topic is topical, whether it's Ferguson or it's we need black folks in tech, that kind of a thing, how as media providers, curators, content creators, how can you talk to the higher ups, or how can we bring larger, more mainstream media to the table to say, this perspective isn't really helpful? How can we grow those stories to get more folks to the table, to get them in tech, to change those perceptions? Is there a business imperative? What would you want to start, Morgan?
Sure. That's really tough for me, right? So a few options. We could, as Blavity, write stories and then pitch them to places like CNN and Huffington Post, who have larger platforms than us and do bylines, right? We could have that kind of content partnership. I think for me, what we've decided to do is actually build up our ground up and assume that our community will support us if we're putting out really high content, or high quality content. So I'm sure you guys will have different answers, but yeah.
For me, I think it's important, as a person that covers diversity in Silicon Valley, I think it's just as important to apply the same concepts that we do to companies that release diversity data to our own companies, and take a look at ourselves and say, are we having enough voices represented? Is our readership represented by our writers? And I think that it's equally as important if we as the media are taking a look at tech in Silicon Valley and we're seeing white men permeating everywhere. Are we as a media organization are doing anything different? And I think that by having diverse voices and having different representations in our publication, it's kind of the same principle as having diverse perspectives at your tech company, right? So I would write a story completely different than somebody from a Hispanic community would write a story. And I think that it makes your writing better, it makes your community better, and it really opens up new avenues for readers.
That was a great answer. I also think you have to lead by example. We're fortunate enough to be in this startup position where we don't have to wade through a whole ocean of red tape to get anything done, whereas like a Fox News would. But if you have to almost embody that entrepreneurial spirit that's alive in your local tech ecosystems. Look at Lyft and Uber. It might not be the best solution to public transportation and taxis and stuff, but it was a solution, and it was innovative, and it changed things, and it was from a ground up perspective. So I feel like in a media facing role, you almost have to dig deep and build from that floor up and lead by example and show these bigger news organizations that the way you're doing things might not be the right way, and the people that you're hiring to deliver the news might not be the right people, I guess if that's the answer I have, I don't know. Lead by example, yeah.
And for us, there's two things. One, we do hear a lot about coverage, and actually, we've been talking to tech companies, and they are saying, don't talk about the lack of diversity. We know about that, so don't cover it anymore, right? We know, we've heard it. But now they want, again, coverage about the 1%, or we already moved this, or we already... So it seems for us that they're trying to advertise or to say, listen to what we're already doing. And for us, that's not what we're looking for, because that's not going to change. We're trying to cover stories that really give access, and there's a call to action, and there's something for our community. For us saying we're going to just raise awareness of the lack of diversity or what the companies are doing, there's no value on that. So our criteria is information that you can use, information that really makes a change or impacts our community, and if it doesn't, it's not on our news. The other thing is that everybody thinks about news, right? That's coverage, is come and cover my event, come and cover and come and cover. There's so much more than coverage. We have programs that are half an hour that you can talk in depth about an issue, and it has nothing to do with news, and it has nothing to do with the 6 o'clock news. So I think that we need to think about media in a very different way of saying, what's my message? And then how do I approach my message to these media media company. Because when the message is strong, then the elements come and the pieces come, and we will support you. But the message is the key.
Sorry, just one more thing that I wanted to add as well. We talked a little bit about white privilege, and there are all sorts of different types of privilege. And I think acknowledging privilege is one of the first and most important things that you can do to start changing either your media company or your tech company or whatever, like trying to become more diverse. I think acknowledging that you have privilege is one of the most important and crucial things that you can do as a writer or as an engineer or anything. It's so helpful.
So speaking of the privilege part and kind of holding media accountable, I think is something that we're all talking about. Can you talk about, since you've all been covering Silicon Valley in some way, shape, or form, how recently, the court of public opinion and everybody releasing their numbers, well, that's great. I'm really glad you released your numbers. What are you going to do about it? What can media do to kind of hold their feet to the fire and really, in the 60s when Watergate was, but now we have social media. So what can we do, and how can your stories kind of push and change things?
Let me just mention something, because I think that someone mentioned it a while ago too. Actually, it is pretty amazing when I introduce myself sometimes and say I work for Univision. People will go like, for what? Who? Really, even Univision is not known. We are a big media company, and for many, companies, they don't know. So I have to thank Trump for what he did, because he put us on the map. So now people know us. We're Jorge Ramos and Trump, so yes. So really, it is that disconnected. So I think that many times they grew up really fast. They grew up within their own worlds, and now they're awakened to say, oh, there's others out there that want to be part of this. So I think it's been very important for us to introduce ourselves and say, we do want a conversation, and a conversation doesn't mean coverage of what you want to say. We have the questions, and we want to know, what are you doing, and what are you doing really to move the needle?
Yeah, I think as media companies, we should be featuring the stories, right? So instead of saying Twitter released their numbers, they're going to go up 1%, which was down 2% from last year, yay. Like, no, that's not a story. Someone's already going to cover that. Let's talk to the engineers that are at Twitter. Let's talk to people who have left. Like, where did that 1% go? Let's go talk to them, right? Figure out what they're doing. Did they start their own companies? Did they move to Facebook? Where are these people going? That would be my perspective.
I think it's important also to, diversity in technology is such a sexy topic these days. Everyone's covering it. There are a ton of stories. All the tech companies are releasing their diversity data, and it's usually abysmal. The pie graphs are largely one color. But I think it's important, too, to celebrate the wins, right? So I think as journalists, we should come to things with a skeptical eye as much as possible. And I've written plenty of stories about how Apple has no women or people of color on stage at their tech events. I feel like I've written that story every freaking Apple event that I cover, right? It's always, I pre-write it, in fact, because I know that it's, like, the stuff is written. Is real. Yeah, the stuff is written. But there's also, too, for instance, when Pinterest released its diversity data, they acknowledged that it was bad and that they had a lot of work to do, but they also came out with some goals. They set some goals. They were very open about it. And I think that it's important, and while we're having this conversation and while more and more people are talking about it and becoming interested in it, I don't think we should necessarily focus entirely on the negative aspect of it, but celebrate the wins and say, this is a company that's doing something right, and while their diversity data might, be majority white men, and especially in engineering, and it's also helpful to say, but this is how they're going to change. And I think when we're talking about providing, like resources or solutions, I think that conversation needs to happen too, that this is what X company is doing, and they're doing the right thing, so.
Yeah, definitely. I think that celebrating wins is definitely the right way to go there, even if it's not the best data. it's a step in the right direction. Rome wasn't built in a day, my friends. I also think, though, that you have to look at it from almost the tech angle, too. Data's hot. Everybody wants it. It gives you insight into the people that you're trying to connect with. And if these companies are releasing data about their diversity statistics, it shows you then, all of us as a society, areas where we can focus our efforts then to heighten those numbers and make those numbers better, offer access to younger kids, get them involved in STEM earlier. I mean, you name it. There's a million different ways you can take that. But that's where I think the really important story is, too, is why is this data significant now? Even if it's bad data, why is it significant? What can we do? How do we make this actionable and apply it to the future to make a better iteration of our company? You know, it's almost like a metaphor for building a product as a startup company.
So to speak on the data point, data will show you the diversity, but at Anita Borg, we talk about data shows the diversity, but culture is the inclusion. We all know that C-suite folks are the ones that are making the larger decisions, and largely it's leadership, and this kind of change is going to have to come from the top. Who in media is tracking these things, and who's building those relationships to make sure that that stuff is changing? What's a solution that we could do to make sure that we're getting the C-suite audiences, that they're feeling the heat, and they're actually doing something about it?
I think, I feel like this conversation has gone really mainstream. I mean, you look at Recode, USA Today, New York Times, it seems like weekly there are stories about diversity in technology. And so it's there, like they're consuming this news and they see it. But the big issue is nothing will change at a company unless the people in the position of power are willing to make a decision. And you have to have the backing and you have to have the support of your CEOs, because you could have the most amazing group of diversity representatives at your company trying to recruit engineers, trying to do this and that. But if your CEO or the person who's making these decisions isn't 100% behind you, it's going to be slow, if not a backwards process, right? And I think that as the media and as people, and the cool thing too is with Twitter and with Facebook, all of us can have a voice in changing this conversation and pushing people forward, right? With Twitter, you can blast a CEO or a company for saying one thing and doing another. And I think that it's not just media, it's not just journalism, it's people that are in this community, that are building this community, that are holding people accountable. And also too, we talked a little bit about this, that we're focusing on culture within the company, not necessarily changing, just like forcing people into this company. Because if you have a bad company culture, all of those women and people of color that you hired are going to leave, right? Like
leaky pipeline.
Yeah, and it's the pipeline issue that we talk about a lot. Yeah, it's very important, but so is retaining talent. And that culture change, that culture shift really starts at the top.
I do want to mention something, because we were talking about data, and I think that the data is being covered, but the stories haven't. I don't see a person behind it, and now they really want to talk about data. So if they move 1%, they want that, exactly. So they want, but I'm going I need to hear more about the people. I need to hear more about who was there that is leaving and why is this lack of inclusion. So I think we really need to go deeper into the person and the stories that are happening and why you started working there and you felt uncomfortable and why women are not there, and did you try and how many times did you try, and did anybody tell you why you were not fit for that company, or what do you need to do in order to fit into that company? So I think that we're lacking. Now we all cover the data, and I think that we all know the data, not very well, but we have the numbers. What we're really lacking is the stories. And so I think that's key in order to continue the conversation and not let it die when they raise the 1% and we think it's over.
Well, I think it's reporters and analysts are the only ones that actually dig that deep into the data, too.
Right. I think that we should focus on hiring managers, right? So you have your chief diversity officer and all that stuff, and they're the internal champion, and that's awesome. But having worked at a big tech company, the people that are making the decisions are the folks that you're going to be working with, right? So if I'm a PM, a group PM, and I need a new PM, the group PM is the person that ultimately has the trump card, right? And they maybe sat at a lunch where they were talking about diversity, and that was the stamp of approval that whatever tech company said was, that was the change that they've made. But that's not the CEO, right? And that's not, even if the CEO and the chief diversity officer has said, like, this is what we're going to do, ultimately, they may say, well, I don't like that person, right? Or they're not a good culture fit. I don't think they're going to do this or that. And we've talked about bias throughout this entire conference. So we know how much it permeates, like, our day-to-day decisions, even when you're not really trying to think about it. So I would focus on the lower part of the company as well as the top.
Yeah, and I think I'm a big fan of the whole ground-up movement, organic grassroots. The people who are the grunts, the drones, all of us who work in the ranks underneath the people in power too, if you can educate them and show them why this data is significant, what does this say about you and the company that you've chosen to align yourself with? If you can show them that, there's a better way to do this, and you can teach them and walk them through that with that data, I think that could affect massive change at that higher level too, instead of putting all your eggs in the basket of trying to change the mind of one CEO. Because if you're a CEO of a company and you get 80% of your workers who are in a sense revolting against your paradigm that you've set, I mean, that's big. You can't ignore that at that point. And I think that's insanely powerful.
Do you guys have anything else you want to add? Because we're going to shift to Q&A. We're good? Okay. Who has my mic in the audience? Okay.
Hi, my name's Linda, and I work in the non-commercial media space, careergirls.org. And my question or thought to the panel is, I think it's important to talk about, at least in the commercial space, why it matters to have the audience represented properly. I mean, what's inclusion means to them. For example, the buying power of the Latino population, the buying power of millennials. I'd like to see more stories that highlight why they should care and what it means to their bottom line.
I agree.
No, and I also think in talking about celebrating success, I think that we should celebrate success of creators, of Latino creators, of African American creators, what's happening in our world. So the tech companies awaken to see what's happening already that they're missing. Because I think that we're missing those stories of everything that is happening outside that is not happening inside because they've been kind of guarding from us getting in.
And I think
Exactly.
Yeah, I think for minority media companies, people who are working with Black and Latino audiences, we have to teach, right? So Blavity's content is not just here's what's happening. It's also like this is the historical reason why, and like here are some other links that you should check out. Here are some new words that you might not know about. So when it comes to us working with brands and potential sponsors, oftentimes we have to teach and say, like, actually look at this $28 billion buying power, right? And this is where it comes from, and here's the reports, and I'm going to send this with my deck so that you know I'm not just making this up. And yeah, it's just part of the game.
Hey guys, great panel. I'm Felicia from Black Tech Week in Miami. So user-generated content, I feel like it's really great because it's empowering people to be storytellers, right, locally. But at the same time, do you think user-generated content is going to be sustainable, or that you're going to have to get to a point where you're compensating people for the content that they're giving you?
I can take this. I think that's a really interesting question, and I think that we're still trying to figure out the best ways to approach these people, right? Like, I mean, you see these Twitter roundups where, the 10 best jokes of the, Emmys or whatever, and it's just basically people like copying and pasting tweets. I think it's really important to respect that content and know that someone was like either very clever or they were very passionate about whatever it was that they were saying. And while I think it's important for the public to understand that this is a public platform and that this is how a lot of people in media are getting their content, if it's a sensitive subject, I think it's helpful to ask first, to say, do you mind if I include this in a story? Or I really value your perspective, and I'm not just going to scrape your tweet, but I want to interview you, and I want to feature you in a story. I think that as reporters, I think it's our responsibility to take that content and add context, and not just find other people's words and make them our own. So I think I don't know about necessarily compensation, but I think that as more and more people begin to use public platforms to share their opinions, I think that us as journalists are going to have to be the ones that are providing that content and thinking about the person behind the tweets.
Yeah, we usually try to find the originator, if it's like a hashtag, right? Like, blame Drake, and which I do. You try to find that person. It's almost impossible. Like, it can be incredibly difficult. So if you can find the person, then of course you want to reach out to them. You want to, backlink and all that jazz. When it comes to compensation, I think that's where it gets weird, right? Because this is public. We're really talking about Twitter here, maybe Instagram, and Vines, but it's a public platform. If you don't want people quoting you, then don't tweet it.
Hi, I'm Jules. I'm product manager at a startup. I'm curious if you've seen any particular trend in sharing stories of success or achievement across minorities, women, etc. If there's any uptick in those kind of stories. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because I think people have stereotypes of what we can achieve or not achieve. But if we can sort of show more of what, for example, like knowing that like employee number one at Dropbox was a black guy, or these other engineers, or these other things, like I don't think mainstream people realize, even despite the challenges and everything against us, like what some of us have accomplished and the context in which we come from to get those things. So I'm curious if you've seen any particular trend in media or working on those sort of initiatives to share those stories, both to inspire generations behind us, but also to help others who are not in this room realize the potential we can have.
I do want to mention something, and I hope that I'm answering your question. I think that we need to acknowledge how empowered we are by social media, but media, like we all can really be those communicators and start not only Facebooking, I'm here having fun, or retweeting a story, starting to communicate what's your story, what you're doing. And it triggered my thinking because we have a campaign right now that it's called I Want to Learn, and is targeting young Latinos, that we want to empower them to say what are they doing because they want to learn beyond what they learn at school. And so it is the role model, but it's not us putting the stories, it's giving you the power to put your story out, and we'll retweet it, or we'll put context, or we'll do more with it, but it's empowering you to do the story. And I think that that's key in this movement.
Yeah, I think it can be overwhelming when you invite all those great stories, right? It's like, hey, we want to feature Black startups, and then you get 50 pitches, and you're like, oh, just kidding. No, I'm kidding. We still want them. But I think thinking about creative ways to make sure that you can curate those stories. So one of the things that we do is we'll do a listicle, right? So we get a lot of Kickstarter campaigns. People are like, I've got this Kickstarter, it's launching next month. And so we'll say, okay, here's all the Kickstarters this month in our community for people to check out, so that, from a resourcing perspective, we can still support people. And then as a reader, you were going for your friend's story to support them, but now you just found 10 other things, right? So that's how we approach it.
To take off my moderator hat and speak from the Anita Borg Institute, we have one of the largest convenings of women in computing in the world. And it's my job personally as a manager of marketing, working with our social media channels, working with video, to make sure that not only do we bring these women together to celebrate, but that we do a signal boost of the highest order as much as we can all year long to get those real stories, not just the CEOs and the CTOs, which are amazing, but the women who are the line developers, the engineers, all of them, making sure the young ones, the boomers who are part of the pioneering movement of it, making sure that all of their stories are there, and not just in the moment, part of a trend, but making sure that it's part of an archive, so that as girls, as everybody can go online, they can access this stuff, and these stories will be in the digital footprint forever, that they're there and they can reach out and bring folks up. We have 5 more minutes. Another question?
Here? Oh, sorry. Hi, I'm Henrietta. My question is really around how do you see kind of the role of kind of the big mainstream media? So thinking of like, CNN and some of the big like news media folks and how, because, a lot of people aren't watching television and everybody is on social media, how do you kind of see your role and just in general, how do you kind of see the media landscape changing and evolving?
And I think that for Univision still, we know that we are that lifeline for our community. And so even though actually when it's breaking news, I don't learn from television the breaking news. I get it from Twitter or I get it from Facebook. So then I'm expecting my news to give me that context to really gather the story behind it, what's happening, what's the consequence to follow it. So I'm looking for more depth information than just the title of from media. So I think that reporting is less about giving me information and more about giving me access to resources, to behind the scenes, to what's really happening in that piece of information.
I think that big media companies aren't going to exist. Like, I think BuzzFeed, Mike, Blavity, we will exist. And we will be, for our generation, what CNN is for our parents, unless those companies evolve, right? Unless they acquire companies like, or they create things like Fusion, right? That's an offshoot of other things. So big, smart media companies are thinking about it. Univision is thinking about it. But some of them aren't, and they just will go away.
Yeah, definitely. And to kind of tie this back into the previous question too, I think there's a big trend of local viewpoint. And the problem with mainstream media, I think, sometimes is it's a little overwhelming. It's so macro, sometimes you have a hard time synthesizing how this headline is really relevant to any local community or city or town. But if you recognize that there are a lot of startup companies who have made a very sizable profit off of, aggregating local opinions about where the best restaurants are, so on and so forth. And you recognize that as a media company, especially as a startup media company, you can do that. You can take that macro level and synthesize it down and effectively capitalize on a trend that you might not at first glance think is relevant to your industry, but then give the locals in a community you're trying to cover a voice. Bring them on, let them contribute to your platform, and once again, show that there's a different way to do things, set a new paradigm by showing mainstream media that people want definition, they crave specifics.
So Caroline, my name is Vince. I actually really like your approach about taking very quick decisions and moving to the further campaign. So my question is, how do you measure the engagement? And that's my key question. Like, you have a campaign, I want to learn, but how do you really make an impact, and how many stories would you generate in future to change people's life? Do you kind of go a little bit on?
Oh yeah, and actually one of the key issues is that we were measuring on number of calls or number of retweets or number of people that read the story, and we decided that that's not impact. That's just touching, but that's not impact. So we need to follow up on those stories. We need to know what happened to that kid. We need to know if that person stayed in that house, if that person was able to go to college, so I think that's the really connection with the community, that we are redefining the goal cannot be the number of people. The goal has to be how we impacted that life and what that goal was. Because if we are covering something on health, we want to see how many people have changed their habits and are healthier. Otherwise, we haven't done our work.
Okay, we have 1 more minute. Can we get one more question? Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Mariah Lichtenstern. Thank you all for participating in the panel. I just want to say quickly that Blavity has just enlightened my world. It is my pick-me-up. So I really appreciate that and the positive stories that you feature, especially, and how influential those are. My question is, when you are profiling people who maybe have had negative experiences, or when you're seeking those stories out, do you find that there's a reluctance or a fear of being blacklisted or ostracized, and how do you address that?
I would say absolutely. I recently wrote a story, well, this was probably at the end of last year, about why 2014 was a good year for women in technology, and it wasn't because of data or statistics, but it was because of how many women were speaking up about their experiences. And I think that that's so important, but also the flip side of it is sometimes people are really afraid of their colleagues or their former bosses or the people that they work with seeing the story, recognizing it, and being blackballed from the industry. And I think that oftentimes it can prevent people from telling and sharing their stories. And I think that there are opportunities to be, anonymous contributors, or there are opportunities to share your stories in different ways that might not, identify you in any way. But I think that the more and more people are speaking up, the more people are risking telling those stories or are tweeting about them and are sharing them. I think that it's going to encourage others to do so. So I think it's really exciting, but I also understand the trepidation and experience it for sure.
Okay, that's it. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for the great questions. And
Thank you.